A day before his death, Senator Graham had just returned from his 10th trip to Ukraine. CBS News chief foreign affairs correspondent and Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan spoke to Senator Graham Friday. He had met with President Zelensky in Ukraine, and Graham told Margaret that he was excited to share news that the White House had finally, after long last, given him the green light for Congress to advance his bill. He'd been pushing it for a long time to put significant financial penalties on the biggest buyers of Russian oil. Margaret Brennan joins us now. Margaret, pick it up from there.
Well, Major, Senator Graham was essentially part of President Trump's foreign policy cabinet, even though he wasn't in the White House. He was constantly on the golf course with the president. He was constantly calling the president and pushing the items he thought were in America's national security interest, that bill being one of them. When I spoke to him Friday, we had a number of conversations, actually, and he was very enthusiastic that finally there was the green light. He saw this as building on a string of events where President Trump, he thought he had been able to persuade, was finally seeing the merits of the argument Volodymyr Zelensky was making, and that boosting Ukraine more fully through purchasing drones, through, giving him the license to produce Patriots, and then finally this congressional bill on sanctions would really change the dynamic. And the senator also in that conversation, Major, really emphasized how helpful a Democrat had been to him in this enterprise, that Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut had been his partner. And he said to me twice, I was looking at my text here, Margaret, you got to call him because he really deserves credit on this. And frankly, Major, you and I both know these days there is not a lot of across the aisle work getting done. There is not a lot of let's, look and work together in America's best national security interests. There's a lot of grandstanding. And on this issue in particular, he fully believed that this was something America should see through. And this morning, I heard from Congressman Mike Turner of Ohio, also a Ukraine ally, saying this is how we need to honor Lindsey Graham by finally moving forward with this bill. We will see if the president does that. He also wanted to see movement on helping Ukrainian kids who were taken from their families by Russia, something he worked with Senator Katie Britt on. He really wanted that to move as well.
And Margaret, on Face the Nation this morning, you spoke with Senator Tim Scott, Republican of South Carolina, the junior South Carolina senator. Here's part of what he had to say about Graham and his legacy.
And as a public servant, Margaret, the one thing that we don't oftentimes think about with Lindsey is he wanted to make sure if you needed help and he could help, he was there. He wanted to make sure that those who would sometimes feel invisible, that they were seen. And he did an incredible job in South Carolina of providing the kind of public service that you would want to see from your elected official.
Margaret, I've covered Lindsey Graham since he arrived in Washington in 1995. You know him just as well as I do. When you think about his accomplishments in the Senate, his role in the Senate in particular, judiciary, foreign policy, and then significantly in the second Trump term on budget matters, what stands out?
Well, Major, there are moments with Lindsey Graham where you would look at him and say, wow, he has changed so dramatically from where he once was when he locked arms with Joe Lieberman and John McCain to work across the aisle on things like immigration reform. You would say, why isn't he doing that? And when you would talk to him privately and ask him, why are you so supportive of President Trump, someone, but frankly, you ran against for the nomination of the presidency in 2016 and said was not going to be good for the country. He was someone who would look at a situation and say, where do I find the opportunity to turn this into something? And that's how he would often provide value for fellow lawmakers to sort of bridge differences, whether it was in a 4.5-hour golf game with the president where he would try to direct the president towards a strategy that perhaps was more in line with his view or with Republican leadership's point of view. That didn't always result in legislation. Certainly, we have not seen anything in more than a decade on immigration, but on things particularly finding a strategy he was trying here out of the war with Iran, he would use that position. And that is something that I think is going to be hard for the Republican Party to replace, that sort of conduit between the president and lawmakers in a way that was persuasive. And so I think that's something that we can't quite quantify what it's going to mean yet in terms of failed legislation or missed opportunity. But I do think it is meaningful for Democrats and Republicans that they won't have this person who so clearly had the ear of the president.
On budget matters, helping steer a good part of the president's domestic agenda, on the Judiciary Committee, helping get confirmed some 200 federal judges to the federal bench. That's part of Lindsey Graham's legacy. Margaret Brennan, as always, thank you so much.